I'm Itai Margalit, the CEO of Starhome Mach, and what I would like to take you through today is somewhat a bit different. Basically, share with you some insights, some thoughts about analogies from a mature market and taking that into the market we're in the mobility market. Just a word about who we are at Starhome Mach. Starhome Mach is a leading technologist that has been working for the last 20 years in the mobile roaming industry and serving today over 300 of the leading mobile operators worldwide and helping them to make roaming as seamless and as agile as possible using network services, global roaming clearing services, retail, billing, etc. Starhome Mach, at Starhome Mach, we know mobile and specifically mobile roaming inside out. The thing is now that we're starting to put more understanding, we're starting to put our first steps in the mobility world, we started to see more and more similarities between the two worlds, between the two domains, markets. And I would like to show you one of them for a start. So what you can see here is on the right-hand side, you have the home network, where you basically, each one of you have his mobile phone, and then the visitor network, meaning when you are flying abroad, this is where you are being hosted in the foreign country using the network of the hosting operator. And then what happens that there is a settlement between the two operators, your home operator, your visitor operator, and there is a settlement. One would ask, what's the relevance to our market? Well, the nice thing about it is that this is actually an ecosystem by which a lot of players working with a lot of other players, many to many, and in between there is either direct relationship between the different operators or hubs, as we're familiar here in this market. And this is exactly what we are seeing. Instead of countries and geographical regions, we actually have commercial borders between the EMPs and the CPOs, which are talking to each other. And the nice thing about what I'm seeing here in this evolving market of the eMobility, the mobility market, is that actually here, the hubs came far quicker, which enables the growth of this market to take a much, much quicker move than in the mobile world. I thought it would be very relevant to use a quote of a German economist, well-known economist, as we are in Berlin, Rudi Dönbosch, I hope I pronounced it right. He actually referred in this quote to crises. Crises take longer to arrive than you can possibly imagine, but when they do come, they happen faster than you can possibly imagine. Now, taking this particular quote and actually changing only the word crisis with things or major evolutions, major market evolutions, we are seeing exactly the same thing in what's happening right now and has happened in the mobile world in the past and what's happening right now, starting to happen in the mobility. And I'll show you what I mean by that. This is the S-curve of the adoption market in the mobile world. You can see that since 1920, there were a lot of technologies, evolving technologies, etc. Now, what happened is that in 1998, 1% of the mature market as it is today has adopted this technology, the mobile technology. What we are seeing that 20 years after, in 2020, there is 8 billion users, and there is 95% adoption. Now think about it. Where the mobility market is today is where the mobile industry was in 1998. You can only imagine and start thinking where this industry will be 20 years or even 10 years from now. To me, it's very exciting, and I'm sure for you as well. Now, driving a little bit lower into that. Back in 1998, on the left-hand side, where the mobile you can see, there is the Nokia. I'm sure all of you remember, and most probably most of you already had. There was also the older one, you know, that you can use it as a hammer as well. It was so durable. And at the same time that this came up, there were few things that were happening that created this massive growth that we saw earlier in the S-curve. First of all, technology was ready. Second thing, the handsets were ready. And very importantly, the price became accessible and affordable for big adoption to occur. Looking now at where we are in the EV or the mobility market, what we're seeing is that we have the gap between the EV, the electric vehicles, to the ICE vehicles is shrinking fast. Technology is growing fast. The infrastructure coverage is growing very nicely. And lastly, there is favorable regulations that are helping to push this industry forward. Looking back at the mobile, taking it from 98 with this hammer called Nokia into what we have today in the palm of the hand with so many services, with actually the original purpose for that, for voice, is no longer even 50% of the usage. We can only draw from this to what can happen in the mobility world. Big question mark, a lot of things to start thinking of. Now, I covered in terms of the evolution why I believe there is a lot of similarities. The only difference between the two industries is the maturity within this S-curve. The mobile industry is in its mature stage, whereas the mobility market is in its beginning. Now I would like to go into specific megatrends that are affecting, in my opinion, and will affect the mobility as it has affected also the mobile industry for the last 2 decades and even more. So one of them is affordable pricing. Until late 90s, the biggest inhibitor to really a big mass adoption in the mobile industry was not technology, it was not the headset, it was pricing. As long as pricing was not affordable, people just could not buy. Most people just couldn't afford it. And if we're looking at the industry that we're at right now, in terms of the mobility, if we're looking at total cost of ownership or cost per mile driven, it's quickly but surely closing the gap with the ICE vehicle. And in my opinion, looking at that and taking the analogy from the mature market, in my humble opinion, once this occurs, when the cost is going to be in par with the cost of the ICE, sky's the limit, and then we'll start seeing the real curve. Another mega trend, technology improvement. In the mobile industry, we had the different services being mainly impacted by the infrastructure, by the network. The evolution of the network, 2G, 3G, 4G, and up and coming 5G, is what enabled a lot of services to take place. And as such, looking at the mobility market, the battery life is a big contributor from a technological point of view for this adoption. The funny thing is, and it's worth mentioning, is that You know, when we had this Nokia 98, actually, it held battery for a week, if not more. And today, within 12 hours, we need to recharge. The thing is, in the mobile industry, the services were the additional services that were provided for the users, for the subscribers, were so demanding and they loved it so much that they were willing to overcome the issues of the battery. Moving on into the infrastructure rollout. That is a big, big issue, has been a huge, massive issue, an inhibitor for the adoption of the mobile industry at the time. But today, if you're looking at what on the left-hand side, the map shows the 4G technology in Europe. Basically, all of that is already covered by LTE, 4G capabilities, and that is driving more services, as I said before, far more data consuming, etc. On the right-hand side, in the mobility market, we have the CPOs or charging points deployment, which is only growing very nicely. Last but not least, megatrends from a regulation point of view, regulation enablement. There were a lot of discussions earlier today when Lior was speaking, Lior from Mobileye, in terms of the regulation and how sometimes they are not helping to move fast. I'll tell you, from where I'm sitting, the regulator helped a lot in the beginning in terms of opening spectrums that was so needed at the time when the mobile just started. And when I'm looking at the mobility industry, in fact, albeit all the things that are stopping, etc., regulation, there is a significant amount of push that they are providing. In some cases, they are sponsoring, subsidizing activities. And from my point of view, this is a big push and a mega trend that will help the industry to flourish. Now I would like to zoom a little bit from the big market of mobile and talk to you about lesson learned from where us at Starhome Mach, we were focusing throughout the 2 decades, and that is roaming. Roaming coverage is king, and I'll explain. At the time where the mobile started to pick up, and obviously travelers had to have coverage, the coverage was the biggest point for operators to grow very, very quickly. If they did not have coverage, very simply, they will not have subscribers. And in terms of the coverage, taking that, as I said before, in terms of the charging points, it's very similar to the mobility industry. The roaming created actually a market of buyers and sellers, where the underlying asset that is used is number of subscribers, minutes, kilobytes, for whatever discount I would be able to give you should you bring me, let's say, 1 million minutes of voice calls, etc. This is very important because that created a win-win situation with a very active market by which it was not viewed as cost, but rather as revenue generator. For a very long time, roaming was up to 20% of the top line of operators. And everybody, in terms of the ecosystem, actually enjoyed it. Specialization was another thing. It took some time to understand who is specializing, what players within the market specializes in what. The one thing that was clearly very quickly was cleared up is that those that wanted to move fast and become the dominant player had to specialize in what they are doing well and know when to go and actually outsource their capabilities that they were not strong at from others that were specializing. This is, by the way, was where us at Starhome Mach helped us a lot to position ourselves in terms of the additional value added services that we provided. Last but not least, which I think is very relevant into this industry, into the mobility industry, is the standards, common standards. One thing that I think was extremely helpful for the growth of the mobile industry was common standards that was governed basically by the GSMA association that was founded by France and Germany, and today everybody is looking at them to continue and bring the common standards. And when they do that, the common standards is the best interest of all players, is what dictates the way they're doing that. Now, looking at common standards and applying that into the mobility, I think we are still a step to go, because when we're looking at the mobility market, there are a lot of different standards in different verticals. In my humble opinion, again, looking at this analogy, when there is, if there will be, and when this possible association will come and help standardize those common standards, in my humble opinion, that significantly will help move things quicker. I would like to explain a little bit, in very high level, what it is that we're doing together with Hubject. We are basically providing the clearing, steering, billing services on the hub of Hubject, and we are helping them to create this seamless and flexible environment for roaming capabilities. I can only commend Hubject for thinking out of the box as thought leaders and actually coming to us, showing what it is that we are trying to do, and understanding that something that comes from a mature market can fairly easily be translated into the evolving market here and actually enjoy the experience that we have gained over the last 2 decades. And today, whoever is connected to the Hubject hub would be able to enjoy these services as well. I was talking earlier about the S-curve, if you remember. Now, actually, there is not one S-curve. There are multiple S-curves, which is worth mentioning. We had the voice, starting with the voice. We moved into the voice everywhere in the form of roaming. Then there was the SMS that was big market at the time, moving into value-added services with ringtones, payment, what have you. And the data, which is today in its maturity stage on the S-curve, versus the IoT that is in the beginning, IoT, M2M, in the beginning of the S-curve. I'm not pretending to know what is the many S-curves within the mobility. I think you would be able to say that far better than I can. But what I think is worth mentioning is that there are a lot of things that we'll discuss today, from a charging technology, energy management, autonomous vehicles, etc., that all players in this industry must be very close to. What I learned from the industry I'm coming from is that those that were listening carefully enough, looking at those different S-curves and knowing how to take them and embed them within their strategy, were the ones successful in going forward with the industry or leading the industry. Last but not least, I will not go through the values here that we are providing, and from my point of view, we can help a lot for the growth of this industry, working with many of the players here. But what I would like to say, guys, I'm very excited to be here. Me and my company are extremely excited to make our first steps into this market, and we are available for anything in terms of consultancy, getting some of the experience we had from this mature market, what can work, what cannot. So I'll just end up at that note, and I would like to thank you very much for the attention.